Steins Gate is one of the best received visual novels and anime of all time, yet remarkably few people are aware of the sheer amount of content that Steins Gate has, as well as the fact that Steins Gate itself is only the second part of a much longer storyline, that being the Science Adventure series, otherwise known as SciADV. Whether you're a complete newcomer looking to start the series, or an existing Steins Gate fan looking to get deeper into the series and check out the other entries, buckle up and get ready for a beginner's guide to Steins Gate and SciADV. In this video, I'll give an overview of what the SciADV franchise is, and then go entry by entry, explaining each title's general premise, fan patches, side material, and adaptations. Starting off with two questions many of you might be wondering. What is the Science Adventure series? And how are the titles within the series connected? In simplest terms, the Science Adventure series is a long-running, heavily interconnected sci-fi multimedia franchise created by Mages and Shimura Studio. It primarily exists in the form of visual novels, serving as the source material medium for all but one of its main entries. Most of the mainline entries have received anime adaptations, but with two exceptions, they are overwhelmingly regarded as very poor in quality, rushing incredibly lengthy narratives into extremely short anime. As of this time, there are 6 mainline entries that have been released: Chaos Head Noah, Steins Gate, Robotics Notes, Chaos Child, Occultic 9, and Anonymous Code. And there are also 4 particularly relevant side entries, those being Chaos Head Love Choo Choo, Steins Gate 0, Chaos Child Love Choo Choo, and Robotics Notes Dash. Each mainline entry in the franchise has a somewhat self-contained plot, its own unique cast, typically its own unique setting, and its own central sci-fi concept. However, they all build upon their predecessors to make an overarching storyline, and they are additionally tied together in the way that the series thematically revolves around 2 things. Firstly, addressing the question, is the scenery your eyes perceive truly real? And secondly, exploring the contention between free will versus determinism. And at the intersection of both, it's also about questioning the very nature of the world, just like science itself. Based on the way the series develops, ideally, you're supposed to go through it in release order. It's important to note that these are not completely standalone stories that just happen to take place in the same world. Rather, I would think of them as more akin to the different parts of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, albeit a bit more forgiving in viewing order. For marketing and sales purposes, Mages and the series' English publisher, Spike Chunsoft, tend to advertise the games as standalone and appropriate entry points for the series, but in reality, you frequently have recurring concepts and characters, as well as certain plot lines and pieces of foreshadowing spanning multiple entries. If you are to start from one of the later entries, various mechanics and plot points may feel utterly nonsensical, and it can potentially deeply hinder one's understanding and enjoyment. At the end of the day, these stories are all incredibly interlinked and interdependent, both narratively and thematically. Therefore, I would strongly recommend reading the series in release order. But let's go through these stories one by one, shall we? Starting off with the series' first and most important mainline entry, Delusional Science ADV, Chaos Head Noah, the story that started it all and set the stage for everything that would follow. This entry establishes the general setting of and mechanics repeatedly used throughout the franchise, and it of course sets up some extremely important story events later down the line. In terms of sci-fi mechanics, as you may have noticed from its subtitle, the central sci-fi concept for Chaos Head is delusions, and the story of Chaos Head Noah follows our shut-in delusional high school protagonist, Nishijo Takumi, as he gets caught up in a series of murders taking place in Shibuya, where he happens to live. And gosh, is this an absolute ride of a story. From its inception, it's a game designed to blur the boundary between what's real and what isn't, the boundary between delusion and reality. And to do so, it takes advantage both of being in the medium of a visual novel, as well as the kind of protagonist that we have. Chaos Head has one of the most unique protagonists I've ever come across, being the embodiment of many of the most extreme possible qualities of an otaku crammed together into a single person. Simply put, he's a complete loser. But Chaos Head as a story is one that simply could not work if it didn't have that kind of loser as its protagonist, both on a narrative and thematic level. And to some, he can understandably come off as very discomforting. He's supposed to be. But I would ask you to please bear through it and try to think critically, because the game itself is fundamentally a criticism of internet culture, and he's designed this way on purpose. And Takumi himself also has an incredibly meaningful and moving character arc that's so worth sitting through. Now, some of you might be wondering about the significance of the Noah tagline. Back in April 2008, they released the original version of Chaos Head for PC, which was simply titled Chaos Head. But due to time and budget constraints, they had to release the story incomplete. When it released, it was a resounding success, which led them to release the full intended version of the story the following year on Xbox 360. Simply put, Chaos Head Noah is a director's cut version of Chaos Head, adding in 6 new character routes, intermission scenes on repeat playthroughs, a couple of small changes throughout the common route, as well as a slightly expanded true ending. In total, Chaos Head Noah has 9 endings, and you need to go through all of them to get the full story, as well as the content important for future entries. With Chaos Head Noah existing, there's effectively no point in playing the original Chaos Head. But yeah, that's entry number 1. Moving on to the second entry in the series is speculative science ADV, Steins Gate. As you're probably well aware, since this may be what you clicked on the video for, Steins Gate is the most popular entry in the franchise, largely due to its massively successful anime adaptation, and because of its sheer popularity, the subseries has several hundreds of hours' worth of content. Starting off with the main story, the plot of Steins Gate follows the 18-year-old self-proclaimed mad scientist Okabe Rintaro, or as he likes to call himself, Hoin Kiyoma, who leads a small group of university and high school students in what he calls the Future Gadget Lab. There, they build a variety of different simple and often seemingly useless inventions, including a microwave connected to their cell phone. But one day, they accidentally discovered the means of sending text messages back to the past through that very microwave. The story then follows Okabe and the Future Gadget Lab's daily lives as they experiment with time travel and find themselves caught up in a conspiracy surrounding the particle physics research organization CERN. Being much less bold and significantly shorter than its predecessor, Steins Gate is one of the easiest reads from the series. I myself read it when I was in middle school. This is also helped by Steins Gate's approach to its protagonist and story. Unlike Chaos Head Noah, where the protagonist is a complete and utter shut-in loser, Steins Gate's protagonist, while still a tad bit of a loser in his own way, is an incredibly charming and charismatic Chad that seemingly every girl in the story wants to romance at least at some point in the game. For most people, that makes him and the story of Steins Gate more bearable to get through. And with regards to themes, Steins Gate is definitely not as thematically rich as most of the other entries in the series, providing little to no social commentary, and much less to ultimately take away from the story. However, this does not at all mean that it's completely themeless. In addition to exploring the aforementioned SciADV franchise-wide themes, it also explores many of the same themes you see in a lot of other time travel works, and if you're a fan of those, you might like Steins Gate too. Steins Gate borrows quite heavily from existing time travel works like James P. Hogan's Thrice Upon a Time, and also extensively references others like Back to the Future or Groundhog Day. But Steins Gate itself is often praised for its fairly unique and elaborate time travel mechanics, which engage heavily with real-life time travel theories, as well as bits and pieces of those seen in pre-existing fictional works. You may notice that there are 2 different versions of the Steins Gate visual novel. One version simply titled Steins Gate, and another titled Steins Gate Elite. What's the difference between these? The one simply called Steins Gate is the original visual novel released back in 2009. Steins Gate Elite is a fully animated remake of the original Steins Gate visual novel released in 2018. It replaces the original sprites and 2D backgrounds with visuals from Steins Gate's anime adaptation, alongside some new animation for the unadapted side routes. By and large, the story contents of the 2 remain mostly the same, but because the Steins Gate anime makes quite a few changes to the plot and doesn't cover the side routes, there's a fair bit of cut and modified content in Steins Gate Elite for things to fit in with the animation, including content connecting Steins Gate to the rest of the series. The new animation is also substantially worse in quality, so most people, including myself, would recommend playing the original Steins Gate over Steins Gate Elite. Moving on to the third mainline SciADV entry, we have Augmented Science ADV Robotics Notes. Taking place in the futuristic year of 2019, the story of Robotics Notes follows the Chuo Tanegashima High School Robotics Club as they attempt to build a giant robot against all odds. With only 2 club members and a major lack of results over the past several years, their vice principal presents them with an ultimatum: win the upcoming Robo1 Hobby Robot Tournament, or perish. The story thus begins following along the everyday activities of the Robotics Club members. But don't judge a book by its cover. Lurking in the background lies a deeply disturbing conspiracy surrounding these enigmatic, augmented reality embedded reports, which protagonist Yashio Kaito begins to uncover bit by bit. Slowly but surely, both the events surrounding the Robotics Club and those surrounding the reports begin to intertwine. Like both of its predecessors, Robotics Notes is incredibly mystery and conspiracy heavy, but in terms of tone, it starts off much lighter and more slice-of-life heavy. In turn, this helps make Robotics Notes the most character-driven SciADV entry to date. Unlike Steins Gate, which is entirely locked into its protagonist's perspective, Robotics Notes is shown through the perspectives of multiple different characters, allowing for extensive characterization through internal monologues in addition to character interactions. Fans generally tend to agree that Robotics Notes has SciADV's best cast, a sentiment which I wholeheartedly agree with myself. One of my favorite aspects of Robotics Notes is that you can examine almost every main cast member through the lens of dreams. After all, that's what Robotics Notes is fundamentally about on a thematic level. This is a story about what it means to have a dream and what it would mean to lose it. But in addition to that, Robotics Notes also takes a huge step forward in terms of Chaos Head's exploration of and commentary on how our world works in an increasingly digital age where internet and social media culture are rampant. Thus, in quite a few ways, Robotics Notes feels like a culmination of the previous 2 entries. It has the kind of social commentary that Chaos Head does, but also the heavy emphasis on slice of life and character interactions like Steins Gate does, taking both those elements from its predecessors and going above and beyond them. I will warn you that these crossover elements extend past themes and into story territory as well though, with various plot points and concepts returning from its predecessors. But anyhow, I'm sure some of you might be wondering, what's the difference between Robotics Notes and Robotics Notes Elite? Is Robotics Notes Elite like Steins Gate Elite? And the answer to that is no. Robotics Notes Elite is an updated re-release of the original Robotics Notes, with improved 3D character models, occasional animated scenes to improve presentation, and some script revisions. So it is not an inferior fully animated remake, but rather the definitive version of the game, and also the only one localized and ported to modern platforms. But that's about it from entry number 3. So now we have ourselves the 4th mainline entry, Delusional Science ADV Chaos Child, which is the thematic sequel to Chaos at Noah. What do I mean by thematic sequel? It's like a conventional sequel, but with a brand new cast and brand new story, where the portrayal of the story's themes is largely reliant on the audience's experience of the prequel. Simply put, it's basically a sequel in every way besides the cast. The story of Chaos Child kicks off in 2015, 6 years after the events of Chaos at Noah, following Miyashiro Takuru, self-proclaimed right-sider and president of a newspaper club at Hekkyo Academy, a high school made of victims of a massive earthquake that leveled Shibuya back in 2009. As Takuru follows a new string of indescribably gruesome murders, he realizes that they are being done in similar style to, and on the exact same days, as another series of murders 6 years prior. Indeed, this is the return of the new generation madness. Chaos Child is a little bit of an exception in SciADV. Whereas the first 3 mainline entries were written almost entirely by Naotaka Hayashi, the lead writer for Chaos Child was Eiji Umehara, who actually came on board as a guest writer just for this entry. and in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't contribute much to the overarching narrative compared to the other mainline entries. After all, it's just another Chaos entry, and it was made as the brainchild of a guest writer. But even then, to this very day, Chaos Child stands out as a fan favorite, in large part because of its phenomenal protagonist and the ever so relevant themes the story tackles. Chaos Child's protagonist is quite comfortably one of my favorite characters of all time, and is neither of the two extremes we've seen with other SciADV protagonists. He's not like Takumi, who's this completely isolated, shut-in loner who wants nothing to do with the murders and the world around him. Takuru is closer to the polar opposite in many ways, being decently social, as well as actively invested and interested in pursuing the truth behind the murders. But at the same time, he's not like Okabe either, who's this super charismatic Chad. Takuru strikes more of a middle ground. At the crux of it all, he's just this neglected kid that wants to be special. Someone who wants to be recognized by the world around him. And his character arc is nothing short of phenomenal. On the thematic side, Chaos Child, much like its prequel, is yet another criticism of internet culture. But it takes things even further, focusing heavily on how the world works in the age of the internet, with all the misinformation, disinformation, and echo chambers that come along with it. And in this day and age, it is more relevant than ever before. Moving on to our fifth mainline entry, we have Paranormal Science ADV, Occultic 9, which covers the sci-fi themes of ghosts and the supernatural. The story follows protagonist Gamon Yuta, a high schooler living in Kichijoji and self-proclaimed NEET god. He runs an aggregator blog site called Kiri Basara, which deals with matters of the occult, trying to disprove any and all reported incidents of the supposed supernatural. But as mysterious and unsettling events begin to unfold throughout Kichijoji, the fates of 9 seemingly unrelated individuals become tied together, and it's up to them to uncover the truth behind it all. Now this is one part of SciADV that's in an incredibly weird position. It was originally a light novel series designed to be completely separate from SciADV. However, it later got retconned and incorporated into the series, making its fit within the franchise rather nebulous for quite some time. Occultic 9 is also unique in that it has 4 different versions of the story in 4 different mediums, each with different narratives that reveal different pieces of information. So to get a more complete picture, you should effectively go through Occultic 9 in all 4 of those mediums: light novel, anime, manga, and visual novel. There are currently 3 light novel volumes that have been released, with a 4th one planned to conclude the series. However, after 7 years and counting, it still hasn't gotten off of hiatus. Meanwhile, the anime and manga have endings that are different from one another, but leave quite a few questions unanswered. And the visual novel version of the story, the latest of them all, released incomplete. At first, series author Chiyomaru Shikura had planned on making a free DLC for an extended true ending in what he referred to as Occultic 9 New World. After several years had passed, he later cancelled that in favor of a potential Occultic 9 Elite, in the style of Robotics Notes Elite. Will this ever come out? Only time will tell. As of now, the manga and visual novel are untranslated, and until the visual novel is complete, the chances of an official localization look slim. So for English-speaking fans, the best way to go through the story is to read the first 3 volumes of the light novel and then watch the 12-episode anime. But if you're tight on time, really, you can just watch the anime outright. So finally, we have the 6th and latest mainline SciADV entry, Meta Science ADV Anonymous Code, which took 7 years to make. As for the story, imagine you had a supercomputer that could simulate each and every event in human history down to the finest subatomic particle, every law of physics, every natural phenomenon, every organism and organic action, along with all the human cultures and societies ever built. What would you expect that to result in? Well, the answer in Anonymous Code is a full-blown Earth simulator arms race, where various parties worldwide are covertly gunning for an edge against the rest of the world, for whoever can best predict the future, can control the world using that foreknowledge. The story takes place all the way in 2037, in a time where the world has become more digital than ever, and much of the technology we know today has become completely obsolete. The game begins over a year after a massive computational error in military satellites led them to launching payloads at cities across the world in what was known as the Sad Morning Incident. In the aftermath of the incident, we follow 16-year-old hacker Takao Kapolon as he encounters this mysterious girl on the run from armed attackers. Little does he know that their encounter will ignite a chain of events that'll flip the world upside down. During their escape from those assailants, he suddenly sees this mysterious save and load app through his brain-machine interface, which allows him to save the current state of the world and then load back to them as if it were a video game. Indeed, this is a story about hackers who will rewrite the future. And gosh, is it a real thriller of a story, the most fast-paced and action-packed the series has ever been. And with some of the best production values ever seen in the medium, it's a real treat to go through. But just in general, Anonymous Code is a huge departure from previous entries in the series, with the scale being much grander and the stakes being much higher. Whereas earlier mainlines followed a formula of a first half filled with slice of life and character interactions, followed by a crushing roller coaster of an action-packed second half, Anonymous Code completely scraps the formula altogether. Instead, it puts its foot on the accelerator from start to finish, boasting the tightest narrative in the series to date. Anonymous Code also opts to remove itself from several other of the series' conventions. For instance, Anonymous Code thankfully completely removes arbitrary route branching and character routes entirely, instead opting for a linear story with 19 bad endings that you keep trying to dodge. Moreover, the game also has a unique gimmick whereby the player and protagonist are two separate entities, part of why it's called a meta-science adventure. And it's specifically the collaboration between the player and the protagonist Polon that furthers the progression of the story. So Anonymous Code takes strong advantage of being a video game, which is part of why it would be very difficult to adapt it into an anime, and why nothing has been announced as of now. But the true appeal of Anonymous Code comes not from its qualities as a semi-self-contained story, but rather what it means for the series at large. Anonymous Code serves as the grand culmination for the entire series, and the payoff for 14 years' worth of build-up and foreshadowing. It addresses so many questions, and also raises even more. This is the ultimate title for both the lore heads and those that were deeply invested in the series' themes. It's quite easily the franchise's second most important entry to date, just behind Chaos Head Noah. So those are each of the 6 mainline entries. Now you may be wondering, where do you play them? And do you need to install any patches like you do with some other visual novel series? So let's get to that. Chaos Head Noah is officially available in English on Steam, GOG, and the Nintendo Switch. However, I will warn you that the official release of Chaos Head Noah is atrocious. I won't fully get into everything in the span of this video, but simply put, it has an extremely subpar localization, heaps of cut and censored story important content, including over 500 lines omitted from one of the most important routes of the game, a myriad of game-breaking bugs, some involving one of the game's choice systems, as well as piss-poor or non-existent image and video translation. Thus, I would highly recommend that you install the Committee of Zero's overhaul patch, which rectifies these issues, fixing the overwhelming amount of bugs, tackling some accessibility-related issues, and replacing the official translation with their own translation that they've been working on for years beforehand and with full series context in mind. It also meticulously translates and edits over 150 different backgrounds and CGs, and it includes subtitles, karaoke, and translations for all 13 opening and ending song videos. You can see a full list of changes over on the patch page of their website. Just in general, I would recommend installing the COZ patch for any SciADV game for their quality of life improvements, but it's so important for Chaos Head Noah especially. Being the entry that sets up the entire series, it's crucial to have consistency in key terms right from the start. This series is very intentional with the choice of wording for certain concepts, and there's foreshadowing in Noah going all the way to the latest SciADV entry, a good chunk of which is completely nuked in the official release. Thus, I would highly recommend playing it with the patch for the full intended experience of the story, and if you want to play the game on PC in Japanese, the Committee of Zero also has a Japanese-only version of the patch, which uncensors and restores cut content. As for Steins Gate, the original version of the game was released in English on the PlayStation 3, PlayStation Vita, the Just USA Store, and Steam. Meanwhile, Steins Gate Elite was released in English on the PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch, and Steam. The best way to play the original Steins Gate is on Steam with the Committee of Zero's improvement patch. The same advice also holds for all Steins Gate games. Unlike Chaos at Noah, Steins Gate's official English release is actually quite superb, its main issues being some port bugs and series-wide key term mistranslations stemming from a lack of future series context at the time. The patch fixes those few translation and editing errors, several of the game's bugs, and even adds in the cosplay patch where you can toggle the character sprites to show the characters in cosplay. The cosplay patch feature is especially cool since that was locked into the original Japanese PC versions of the game. But if you're a console player and you have no choice but to play Steins Gate unpatched, or even Steins Gate Elite, it's really not the end of the world. Steins Gate's side visual novels, however, were not as lucky when it came to localization quality and consistency between them, so for those, it's more important to install the patch. Meanwhile, Robotics Notes Elite is officially available in English on the PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch, and Steam, but its official English release is unfortunately very, very subpar. Not quite as bad as Chaos at Noah's, but still easily one of the worst in the series, both in terms of port and script quality. On the port side, the skip function is broken, and for the Steam release, it doesn't even have mouse support. And on the script end, the localization has been widely criticized for being riddled with typos and heaps of translation errors, often for lines that can drastically affect one's understanding of the story, the characters, as well as cross-series connections. But as is the case for all other SciADV titles, the Committee of Zero patch fortunately rectifies these issues, fixing bugs, translation errors and typos, translating tons of CGs and videos, and even providing mouse support. If it's any testament to how extensive this patch is in particular, in the Committee of Zero's first version of the patch, they had to modify an entire third of the script. So I would definitely recommend that you play the game on Steam with the patch installed. Other fans outside of the Committee of Zero have made earlier versions of their patch available to use for the Nintendo Switch and PlayStation Vita, provided that those consoles are jailbroken and able to have custom firmware installed. Moving on, Chaos Child is officially available in English on the PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch, GOG, and Steam. As for release quality, the official release is nowhere near as bad as the likes of those of Chaos at Noah or Robotics Notes Elite. It was translated by Mages in-house by one person, that being Adam Lenzenmayer. So it definitely turned out much better than those that were contracted to third-party companies with multiple different translators. That being said, it still has its fair share of issues. For one, a huge part of the gameplay mechanic for Chaos Child is the mapping trigger system. However, in all official releases other than the Switch port, the map is untranslated. That makes it basically impossible to finish the game unless you know Japanese or just use a guide for those moments, which can be a little annoying. Moreover, the translator for this game was also given an extremely short time frame for the localization, that being only half a year for the longest entry in the series with over 45,000 lines. As such, the ultimate result was more than a little spotty and decently criticized by members of the SciADV community for its inaccuracies and generally flat prose, especially in comparison to the original Japanese. Fortunately, just like with the 3 previous mainline entries, the Committee of Zero made a very extensive improvement patch, providing various bug fixes, a huge number of script inconsistency fixes, a translation for the map and over 200 in-game images, audio quality improvements, etc. The patch also strongly emphasizes series-wide continuity, but especially so between each of the Chaos games. From a quality of life standpoint, there's really no reason not to get their patch if you're playing the game in English on Steam. If you have the game on GOG, or you have a hacked Switch, they're also working on a version of the patch for the GOG and Switch ports too. As for Occultic 9, the original light novel version was officially localized by JNovel Club, and the series is available on their site as well as various common ebook storefronts. Anonymous Code, meanwhile, is available for the PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch, and Steam. As for the quality of the official release, Anonymous Code is a rare exception in the series in that its official English release was very well received. So if it's more convenient for you to play the game on console, go for it. Anonymous Code was translated by Andrew Hodgson, aka Steiner, who was one of the 2 official translators for the original Steins Gate, and also a longtime SciADV fan translator before then. So his passion for and deep understanding of the series really shows in the official localization, with the script knocking down most instances of series-wide key terms, and having a strong understanding of character voice. Moreover, the game also has incredibly extensive image editing, in stark contrast to how a lot of the earlier localizations had very minimal graphical work done on them. And most shockingly, the localization also features a full-fledged English dub for the first time ever in the series, and it's honestly one of the best English dubs I've ever heard. Just in general, the official English release was nothing short of a miracle. That being said, the English release was not entirely perfect, as there are a couple hundred unsubtitled voice lines, some incorrect pieces of terminology that mages mandated be used officially, and some occasional mistranslations and typos here and there. Like with most other SciADV entries, the Committee of Zero also patched Anonymous Code, featuring their usual quality of life and accessibility improvements, but in this case, they made 2 different types of patches, a full patch and a partial patch. Their full patch is just the same as their usual ones, but their partial patch doesn't touch voice lines, being designed for English dub players. So depending on the direction you're going with, you have both those options available to you. With matters concerning the mainline games out the way, let's go over side material, since that's where the majority of content in the SciADV franchise truly lies. Starting off with Chaos Head side material, first up is Delusion of Zero. It's actually a prelude short story to Chaos Head Noah, unveiling some very interesting details that aren't explicitly addressed in the main game. With the Committee of Zero's overhaul patch, it's included in-game and you can read it immediately after finishing up the true ending. The next big piece of side material is Chaos Head Love Choo Choo, which is a full-fledged sequel visual novel to Chaos Head Noah, serving as a parody of the rom-com genre. But please don't judge a book by its cover. While by no means the most essential title in the series, Chaos Head Love Choo Choo is actually pretty important for the series. It introduces some recurring concepts and makes it a lot easier to understand certain parts of a few of the later entries, and it provides some proper closure to the character arcs of all the main cast members. As of the time I'm making this video, there isn't a translation for it, but the Committee of Zero has been working on a fan translation and fan PC port for quite some time. With the way they've been progressing, it should be out sometime soon. Another nice piece of Chaos Head side material is Chaos Gate, which is a funny little short story about a meeting between Senna, one of the major secondary characters in Chaos Head Noah, and Okabe, the protagonist of Steins Gate. This side story released just before Steins Gate did, and is meant to serve as a primer in preparation for it. And if you stop and think about inter-series connections, you might find a fairly interesting implication within it too. Beyond these 3, there's quite a lot more untranslated Chaos Head side material out there, short stories and drama CDs especially, or even manga like Chaos Head Blue Complex, a side story following Senna and Kozue. But by and large, Delusion of Zero, Chaos Head Love Choo Choo, and Chaos Gate would be my biggest recommendations. So moving on to Steins Gate, the SciADV entry with the most amount of side material. Personally, I actually like some of Steins Gate side material more than the main story itself, and quite a few may actually agree with me on that. I won't go over each and every single bit of content there is, since much of it just isn't translated, but I will go over my recommendations for what I would deem as the most relevant. First up is Steins Gate's several sequels and epilogues. Steins Gate has quite a few of them, namely Holy Day of the Calamitous Birth, Variant Space Octet, Egoistic Poriomania, and Load Region of Deja Vu. Starting off with Holy Day of the Calamitous Birth, which is the official afterstory to Steins Gate that was included in the Science Adventure series Maniac's Guidebook. It's a short novella taking place on Christmas Eve, just a couple months after the end of the main story, and it serves as a bit of a tie-in to Robotics Notes. Holy Day is one of my personal favorite pieces of Steins Gate side material, since it really showcases the sheer mental toll that the events of Steins Gate took on Okabe. It has great characterization all around. Variant Space Octet, meanwhile, is a 2-hour-long 8-bit visual novel for the PC, and is effectively a Chaos at Steins Gate crossover, with the plot revolving around Okabe, the protagonist of Steins Gate, coming into contact with lightning-fast Neidhart, aka Nishijo Takumi, the protagonist of Chaos Head. Octet is actually pretty important in the context of SciADV vis-a-vis a couple of concepts that it introduces and explores. Definitely play this at some point before the latest entry in the series. While not officially translated, there is a fan translation as well as YouTube playthroughs of it. Also, please do not confuse Variant Space Octet with Steins Gate 8-bit ADV, the Nintendo Switch exclusive bonus to Steins Gate Elite. 8-bit ADV is just an abridged retelling of some parts of the original Steins Gate in 8-bit format, with very little relevance to the wider series, but that too is another piece of side material you may want to check out if that interests you. Anyhow, moving on to the next two big Steins Gate afterstories, those being Egoistic Poriomania and its sequel, Load Region of Deja Vu. These two stories exist in multiple mediums, but are best known for their anime versions, Egoistic Poriomania being the OVA, or episode 25 of the original Steins Gate anime, and Load Region of Deja Vu being the Steins Gate movie. Both stories are included together and significantly expanded upon in the novelization of Load Region of Deja Vu, though as of this time, it remains untranslated. Egoistic Poriomania takes place a few months after the end of the original story, with the cast taking a trip to the US. It provides some really nice closure to the stories of the main characters, and is all around cute fun. Load Region of Deja Vu, however, is a much more serious story that takes place the following summer. This story in particular is just as important to the wider series as Variant Space Octet is, and I would strongly recommend you watch it before you get to the latest entries in the series. Moving on from Steins Gate sequels, we have side entry visual novels, the biggest and most important of them all being Steins Gate Zero, which is effectively an interquel to the original visual novel based off of pre-existing Steins Gate side material. More specifically, the Steins Gate Zero visual novel is based on the drama CD Arclight of the Pointed Infinity, the epigraph light novel trilogy, and the ending of the novelization Annularly Chained Ouroboros. However, it's not just an adaptation, half of it is also brand new, completely fresh material, some of which helps further connect it to SciADV at large, both in a thematic context as well as in terms of foreshadowing for future installments. It's best to play this after Chaos Child. But beware that Steins Gate Zero's visual novel does not tell the full story of Steins Gate Zero, and that you also additionally need the Steins Gate Zero anime to complete the tale. But anyways, next up among the major side entry visual novels are My Darling's Embrace and Linear Bounded Phonogram. Neither of these two visual novels are particularly essential. The former is basically just a romance comedy spin-off where you try and date the Steins Gate cast members, albeit with a few chaos bait moments. If that's what you're into, go for it. But the latter of the two, Linear Bounded Phonogram, is quite interesting to look back upon with full series context. It's a collection of 11 short stories, many of which are by guest writers. While not part of the main continuity, some of the stories within it are pretty cool, so I definitely recommend it if you're ever feeling starved for content. Moving on from visual novel side entries to drama CD and manga side material, there's quite a lot out there. Starting off with a trilogy of drama CDs that released just months after the original visual novel. Those being Drama CD Alpha, Babel of the Grieved Maze, Drama CD Beta, Arclight of the Pointed Infinity, and Drama CD Gamma, Hide of the Dark Dimension. The first of these, Babel of the Grieved Maze, depicts the events of Chapter 10 from the perspective of the main girl, Makise Kurisu. In doing so, it also showcases her backstory and provides much more depth to her character, which is very well needed since the main story is completely locked into the perspective of Okabe. This drama CD also has a fantastic 4-volume long manga adaptation, which just like the drama CD, has also been fan translated. If you like Kurisu, or frankly speaking, even if you don't, give Babel of the Grieved Maze a go. Meanwhile, the second of the trilogy, Arclight of the Pointed Infinity, is a very emotional story that centers around Mayuri, heavily expanding upon Steins Gate's true ending. This drama CD's events were eventually adapted into Steins Gate Zero, but the original is still very much well worth checking out. Arclight also has a 1-volume long manga adaptation, which is just as good. I'd definitely give this a go. Now the last part of the trilogy is Hide of the Dark Dimension, which is a very dark and heavy side story centering around Okabe and Moeka. If you ever feel as though you want more Moeka related content, you have to give this a go. Beyond this trilogy, there's still many different Steins Gate drama series out there. A couple important ones are An A Posteriori Being or An A Posteriori Existence, which is the movie's accompanying drama CD, as well as Paradise Lost and Adaptive Radiation, and Feast of the Valkyries, which are both drama CDs for Steins Gate Zero. The former is content from a cut route of the visual novel that, due to severe time constraints, they simply could not fit in. Meanwhile, the latter follows along the events between episode 19 and 20 of the Steins Gate Zero anime. On the manga end, one huge recommendation I have, since this is my #1 favorite piece of Steins Gate side material, is Brawny in Motion of Love and Hate, which serves as the backstory for Mr. Brawn. Though it's only 2 volumes long, it's a very heavy read and essential to understanding his character. Beyond this, there are also full manga adaptations of multiple routes from My Darling's Embrace, a Suzuha-centered spin-off called Rebellion of the Missing Ring, a Kurisu-centered spin-off called History's Strongest Light Fever, albeit that was basically cancelled partway through. There was even a manga adaptation of the Epigraph trilogy, though that too was cancelled midway through its run once they had announced Steins Gate Zero. What I've mentioned is nowhere near the full amount of Steins Gate side material there is, but they are my general recommendations for what to go through in this series after finishing the main story. Much like Steins Gate, Robotics Notes has quite a lot of side material, especially in manga and light novel form. Unfortunately, however, much of that just hasn't been translated. For instance, the Project Pleiades novel, as well as the Pleiades Ambition, Dream Seeker, Phantom Snow, and Side Junna manga. But from what has been translated, the biggest and perhaps most important of side material from the Robotics Notes subseries is the visual novel Robotics Notes Dash. As of date, this is the second most recent SciADV game to have released back in 2019, and is thus also best read second last. The story is effectively a silly, lighthearted sequel VN to Robotics Notes, with Daru, a major secondary character from Steins Gate, as one of its 2 protagonists. Its reception has been a little bit more mixed relative to the other entries in the series, but provided you don't take it too seriously, you might have some fun with it, seeing what the Robotics Notes cast is up to following the events of the main game, as well as seeing what the Steins Gate cast members are up to in 2020. Besides Dash, there's also its accompanying drama CD called The Home of Our Dreams, which is effectively like a short Phase 13 to Robotics Notes Elite, and an incredible epilogue, especially if you ever come feeling like the original story ends a little too abruptly for your liking. Additionally, there's also the unpublished memoirs of Senomiya Misaki, which was originally a prequel light novel to the story of Robotics Notes, detailing Misa's past. While the light novel version has not been translated, its manga adaptation has been. This in particular is one of the most important pieces of Robotics Notes side material, and would help in understanding some elements of the story, as well as some of the motivations of certain characters, so definitely give this one a read. Beyond that, there's also Robotics Notes Side Phase, Maps, The Rain, and Macarons, which is a short story taking place in parallel to the events of Phase 9 and following the mysterious side character, Sawada Toshiyuki. And a fan-favorite piece of Robotics Notes side material is the 5th anniversary short crossover novella, Tomorrow in the Box. The story follows along all 3 of the Chaos Head, Steins Gate, and Robotics Notes casts, during different time periods of course, as this little box connects all 3 of them. This one is unbelievably cathartic to get through, and I urge you to give it a read after finishing the first 3 main lines. Moving on from Robotics Notes, Chaos Child is one SciADV entry that's especially reliant upon its side material, and there's quite a few things in there that I would say are essential. I personally don't think the order in which you consume the side material matters too much, but the fandom generally agrees upon the following order: The Wrong Sider Memoirs, Slumbering Fools, Children's Collapse, Love Choo Choo, Children Survive, Wish, and Dream. To briefly go over each of these, The Wrong Sider Memoirs is a light novel covering the main story of Chaos Child, but from the perspectives of Kurusunono, as well as the new gen murder victims. It sheds tremendous light on certain aspects of the story that the main visual novel simply did not get to cover. Meanwhile, Slumbering Fools is a drama CD on Mio's past. Children's Collapse is a 3-volume manga also on Mio's past, but covering more content and much more in-depth, following her under the tutelage of Makise Kurisu. Next, Love Choo Choo here is exactly like it is for Chaos Head, a sequel visual novel disguised as a rom-com. While currently untranslated, the Committee of Zero is working on both a fan translation and fan port of the game, both of which have made tremendous progress in recent times. Children's Revive is an epilogue light novel to Chaos Child, taking place after the true ending. This in particular is very often praised for having some of the highest emotional highs from the SciADV franchise, and also offers strong, extensive characterization and development for the game's main cast, as well as side characters. This currently has 2 fan translations out there, but both are heavily criticized for being unreflective of the story's actual content, as well as being very poorly edited. However, SciADV fan translation group NS2C is currently working on another fan translation for this novel, which they promise to be significantly more representative of the content and quality of prose of the original novel. So you may want to wait for that. Lastly, Wish and Dream are 2 drama CDs relating to the true ending of the visual novel. There's still a fair bit of side material besides that, but that about covers what's generally considered important for the story. Next up, we have Occultic 9 side material. By and large, there are a few small, untranslated pieces of content here and there, but since even the main story isn't done yet, don't worry about it. And lastly, for Anonymous Code, it only has one major piece of side material at this time, that being its guidebook titled A Beginner's Guide to Earth Simulator. However, this guidebook might honestly be the single most important piece of SciADV side material due to the sheer magnitude and importance of the reveals present within it. You straight up will not fully understand Anonymous Code without it, so I would urge you to read it either immediately before or immediately after the main game of Anonymous Code. The guidebook is available in the digital deluxe editions of the console ports and as a DLC on the Steam version. So that just about wraps up side material. So let's move on to adaptations. Starting off with Chaos Head. Chaos Head has had a couple of different adaptations, none of which are good. First up is the absolute atrocity that is Madhouse's 12-episode anime adaptation from 2008. It's no secret that visual novel-derived anime adaptations are usually pretty bad, for a variety of different reasons. The length and popularity of the source material, the perceived profitability by investors, contemporary financial circumstances, etc. But gosh, does the Chaos Head anime take the cake for being one of the worst anime adaptations of anything ever? If you thought the Tokyo Ghoul Repart 2, or The Promised Neverland Season 2, or Berserk 2016 were bad, here's something much worse. On top of the Chaos Head anime cramming a story of its length in just one cour, it also makes some of the dumbest adaptation decisions I've ever seen. It changes up so much of the original story, outright skipping one of the most pivotal chapters from the game, adding in nonsensical anime original material, and completely changing the tone and atmosphere to resembling that of a half-baked comedy harem anime. Please avoid the Chaos Head anime at all costs. But if you've finished the visual novel and want to torture yourself, be my guest. Give it a watch. If you watch the English dub, it might give you a little bit of a laugh. But that technically wasn't the only anime adaptation of Chaos Head. Episode 0 of Silver Link's 2017 Chaos Child anime adaptation covers the entirety of the common root of Chaos Head in the span of merely 20 minutes. And funnily enough, Chaos Child Episode 0 adapts Chaos Head even better than the 12-episode Chaos Head anime does. Having been scripted by the game's lead writer, Naotaka Hayashi, it's much more faithful to the plot and tone of the original game. However, it is of course only 20 minutes long. So this does not replace a full 40-hour long game and will not give you nearly enough of what you need for adequately understanding the rest of SciADV. But if you ever want a nice little recap, this is pretty nice. Moving on from anime adaptations into manga adaptations, we have the 1-volume long Chaos Head manga adaptation. As you can probably tell, by virtue of it only being 1 volume long, it's rushed to hell and it skips most of the story anyway. So you should absolutely not read this before the visual novel, but if you finish the main game, it can potentially be interesting in the way it tries to portray certain moments to fit its runtime. Chaos Had Love Choo-Choo also has a 3-volume manga adaptation, but just like the visual novel, it is also untranslated, so I can't comment too much on it, but it does exist and is fairly well received. But that's about it from Chaos Head's adaptations, so let's talk about Steins Gate. Steins Gate is the rare exception in this series in that it actually got a decently competent anime adaptation. To someone only interested in the medium of anime, it's one of the only 2 sub-series I could recommend to someone looking to be an anime only. Despite Steins Gate being one of the shortest entries in the series by line and word count, back in 2011, it received a full-fledged 24-episode anime adaptation, giving it enough time to tell the story properly. And in conjunction with its stellar direction, it's truly a wonderful watch. Nonetheless, the Steins Gate anime adaptation still has some significant problems, which a lot of people often don't recognize due to not having played the visual novel or any of SciADV. While still mostly faithful, it makes quite a few changes to the narrative, the most egregious of them being in its adaptation of Chapter 9, where it pulls what might be the worst character assassination I've ever seen an adaptation pull off. In addition to that, it also basically deletes an entire character, omits some of the most impactful moments from the VN, and removes many of Steins Gate's connections to the wider series. For SciADV fans, this can especially come off as quite disappointing. Nevertheless, even with all these flaws, it's still supremely above every other anime adaptation in the series, which is truly a testament to how poor the other adaptations are. However, due to Steins Gate's immense popularity, even Steins Gate Zero got an anime back in 2018, which was twice as long as most mainline SciADV adaptations. I briefly alluded to this earlier, but Steins Gate Zero's anime is in a bit of a weird place. It's not exactly a conventional adaptation of the Steins Gate Zero visual novel. Because of the way in which Steins Gate Zero's narrative is supposed to work, the Steins Gate Zero anime is more like a final route, complement, or sequel to the Steins Gate Zero visual novel, finishing off the storyline. It still presents itself in a way that you can still follow along and enjoy it just fine as an anime only, provided that you watch the TV special, episode 23 beta, beforehand. Episode 23 beta, aka Open the Missing Link, is an alternative version of episode 23 of the original Steins Gate, but with a different second half. Its events basically lead into the start of Steins Gate Zero, so to simplify things, the order in which you're ideally supposed to go through the Steins Gate anime is all 24 episodes of the original Steins Gate anime, followed by episode 23 beta, and then all 23 episodes of the Steins Gate Zero anime. You can watch episode 25 or the movie whenever you wish, though I would recommend watching them before Steins Gate Zero, simply because they released first, and this way you can more easily catch references and earlier instances of some interesting concepts. Now, one thing I do want to address is what some people call the chronological order, which isn't actually chronological, but in which you watch the first 22 episodes of Steins Gate, then watch episode 23 beta, then all of Steins Gate Zero, and finally the last 2 episodes of the original Steins Gate. Of course, if you've already read both visual novels, or if this is a rewatch, then go right ahead. There's nothing wrong with this. You do you. But for a first-timer looking to go the anime-only route, I would strongly advise against it. In the first place, Steins Gate Zero is a side entry that relies upon its viewers having full context of the ending of the original Steins Gate. It's already enough of a drawback to not have full context of the Steins Gate Zero visual novel or its source material, but to lack even the ending of the original Steins Gate, you're just not really going to understand the relevance of a lot of what's happening within Steins Gate Zero as you're going through it. And in a lot of cases, I've also seen people outright drop Steins Gate Zero midway through, leaving them without having finished either of the 2 series. So while technically possible to still enjoy the series in that order, I'd still strongly advise against it. As for other adaptations, Steins Gate also had a 3-volume manga adaptation, which is very rushed. And there's some adaptation decisions in there that are honestly even more offensive than what the anime does. I think the manga's cool if you just want a quick way to re-experience the story, but please don't use it as a substitute for the visual novel. I'd give that same line of advice for the Steins Gate Zero manga adaptation, though it's significantly better due to being 6 volumes long as opposed to 3 volumes long. Unlike the anime, the Steins Gate Zero manga is very much just a conventional adaptation of two routes from the visual novel, the Promised Renashimento route, as well as the Vega and Altair route. Not at all something that can replace the entirety of the VN or the anime, but a very nice complementary piece nonetheless. Beyond the anime and manga, Steins Gate did also have a stage play adaptation called Living ADV Steins Gate. If you're interested in stage plays, you may want to check it out after the original visual novel. Curiously enough, it adapts all the routes of the VN, which no other adaptation besides it had done. But that's about it from Steins Gate's adaptations. So let's talk about SciADV entry number 3. Robotics Notes has been adapted into 3 different mediums: anime, manga, and stage play formats, starting off with the incredibly mediocre anime adaptation. The Robotics Notes anime started airing just 3 months after the release of the original visual novel, and ran for 22 episodes. To date, it is the only non-Steins Gate SciADV entry to have received a 2-cour anime, which did come to its benefit. The first half of the anime is fairly okay as an adaptation. Combined with excellent animation and direction, it's a real treat to see the character interactions come to life so vibrantly, but unfortunately, they didn't use the episodes they had as wisely as they could have, making very questionable decisions on what to keep, what to omit, and what to change. And to begin with, 22 episodes still wasn't nearly enough, given that Robotics Notes' visual novel is a lot longer than Steins Gate's. So they really rushed through content in the second half, leaving it very hard for someone to follow without visual novel context. Which was the case for me, since I watched the anime long before the visual novel was localized. But even aside from the episode count issue, there's so many other problems with the adaptation, one of its biggest issues being that it completely destroys Kaito's characterization. With the visual medium like anime, many directors subscribe to the belief of show, don't tell, as they often should. But in taking this approach for a story like Robotics Notes, because Kaito's characterization in the visual novel happens largely through his own internal monologues, in the anime, he's left with little to no characterization at all. Rather, he's left feeling incredibly bland and almost like he just exists, in stark contrast to how Steins Gate's anime often keeps quite a fair number of Okabe's internal monologues. On top of that, despite Robotics Notes effectively being a crossover title, the anime adaptation tries cutting the story's ties to the rest of the series, making various plot points nonsensical. While far from the worst SciADV anime adaptation, I absolutely could not recommend the Robotics Notes anime to any newcomer. But really, it's quite fine as a complement to the visual novel, and a fun way to re-experience the story. The 6-volume long Robotics Notes manga is in a somewhat similar boat. A nice complement to the visual novel, and a fun way to revisit the narrative, but absolutely not a substitute. The manga actually adapts the first 3 phases of the visual novel even better than the anime adaptation does, with their content taking up almost 4 whole manga volumes. The issue is that the last 70% of the story is crammed and rushed to oblivion in the last 2 manga volumes, basically to the level of the Chaos Head manga. Nonetheless, the Robotics Notes manga still has some value over the anime in that it adapts some content that the anime cuts, for instance, the Phase 5 ending. And the first 4 volumes of the manga alone are absolutely stellar to begin with, so I'd recommend it all anyways. The last Robotics Notes adaptation is the stage play, which is available to see on YouTube, albeit with no subtitles. It only has 2 hours to retell the entire story, but it is still a real treat to see the characters acted out in real life. Check it out if it interests you. But that just about wraps it up for Robotics Notes. So let's talk about Chaos Child. Chaos Child received 2 different adaptations, a 14-episode anime adaptation, and a 4-volume long manga. Given that Chaos Child is the franchise's longest entry by a significant margin, being close to twice as long as Steins Gate, both adaptations were very, very poorly received. Many often consider Chaos Child's anime to be among the worst visual novel-derived anime adaptations of all time, and for good reason. It's basically like if Steins Gate was adapted into only 6 anime episodes. You're effectively watching a glorified recap of a recap. So please, stay the hell away from the Chaos Child anime. The 2 upsides to the Chaos Child anime, however, are the first half of episode 10, which shows anime original content expanding upon the past of Takeru and Serika, as well as episodes 13 and 14, which cover the true ending at a somewhat decent pace. The manga is currently untranslated, but is often considered interesting insofar as it shows perspectives not seen in other versions of the story. So those aspects of the adaptations can be rewarding to see. But please, do not ruin such an amazing story by going through one of its adaptations first. Moving on from Chaos Child and into Occultic 9. Occultic 9 is the one and only non-Steins Gate SciADV anime that I could genuinely recommend to someone looking to be an anime only. The animation and direction are superb, and honestly well above every other SciADV anime adaptation. However, due to needing to cover so much content in just 12 episodes, it's incredibly fast-paced, not just in terms of story progression, but also dialogue. It can be a lot harder to follow than even something like the Tatami Galaxy or the Monogatari series. Therefore, I would still highly recommend reading the light novels first. As mentioned earlier, Anonymous Code has yet to be adapted into any other medium. While rather difficult to have its story outside of a video game, hopefully it gets adapted someday. But that just about wraps it up for all the major adaptations in the series, so let's move on to talking about some of the series' future projects. Beyond the 6 mainline entries that we have so far, back in 2020, Majors also announced 3 major Steins Gate related projects. One of these was Steins something, which would be a thematic sequel to Steins Gate in the same way that Chaos Child is to Chaos at Noah, and presumably the 7th mainline SciADV entry. And in December of last year, Makoto Asada strongly implied that in commemoration of Steins Gate's 15th anniversary, they would be releasing it in 2024. With us being over halfway through the year and having heard nothing since, it may have potentially been delayed into 2025. Or maybe he was just never talking about Steins something to begin with. Another one of the projects announced back in 2020 was Steins Gate Zero Elite, which would be a fully animated Steins Gate Zero visual novel. However, little to no word has been provided on it since, and we don't even know if it's actually happening anymore. Furthermore, if it does happen, the approach they take with it would be interesting to see, as the Steins Gate Zero anime is functionally a sequel to the Steins Gate Zero visual novel rather than a conventional adaptation. So if they were to cover VN exclusive content, they would have to animate a lot from scratch. The ideal approach would be to incorporate all the roots from the original Steins Gate Zero visual novel and also the anime route into a single game, so you can complete the entire story in one package. However, given that this would take a crazy amount of investment, I sincerely doubt that this would happen. Maybe it'll just be the Steins Gate Zero anime in visual novel form. But even something like that would end up being far more useful than the original Steins Gate Elite, so I'm personally looking forward to it. And thirdly, Mages also announced a Hollywood live-action adaptation of Steins Gate by Skybound Entertainment. But even for that too, they have given no update on it in 4.5 years. I wouldn't be surprised if the project is outright cancelled. And in the first place, westernizing a story as deeply embedded in otaku culture as Steins Gate would be a huge challenge. Beyond the Steins sub-series projects, there's also a couple other things that they have announced. For instance, as I previously mentioned, Occultic 9 Volume 4 and Occultic 9 Elite. It's been 7 years since they've done anything with Occultic 9, but hopefully things will change soon because we've been left hanging for quite a long time. Lastly, at the end of 2022, Chiyomaru in his Twitchcasting livestreams alluded to plans for 1 to 3 future SciADV titles potentially taking place in 2048 or 2060. Will any of these actually pan out? Who knows? Makoto Asada previously stated that with Anonymous Code out the way, they'd be aiming to release a new SciADV entry every 2 to 2.5 years, so hopefully it shouldn't be too long until we hear more. But for now, these are the main future projects that we're looking forward to in the series. Now, there are some fairly helpful resources out there for learning about the series. One of the biggest ones is Kiri Basara, a SciADV-centered fan information hub and news site named after the blog site seen in Occultic 9. They keep up with all the latest series news and have many reviews, guides, and information articles on the series. For series side material, there are 3 pages in particular that I would highly recommend. One is Originope's Science Adventure Series Essential Side Material Guide, which is a page that lists all of the most essential SciADV side material and provides links to access them. A similar but much more extensive page is Observer of Time's SciADV Lists GitHub page. This one is a little bit more outdated, but it has a wider amount of materials listed for the first 4 mainlines. Finally, the last of the 3 pages I'd recommend is NRW, which is a Japanese-made fan site which has the most extensive listing of officially released SciADV material. Some helpful resources on the fan translation side are the Committee of Zero, who make fan patches for the games, as well as Arc Relight and NS2C, 2 groups that handle side material fan translations. The Committee of Zero website has a list of all their projects and an in-depth explanation for all their features, and on their server, you can find people who can help you troubleshoot any technical issues with the games. The SciADV subreddit, Steins, and its Discord server, Beyond the Gate, are also great resources to get information on the series and also to engage in fan discussion. The pinned post on the SciADV subreddit by u/ArcticFox19 has a nice little Reddit presentation also introducing the series. And he even made a video essay version, which is much more concise than mine. I've linked his video in the description in case that interests you. For playthroughs, there are a few major Discord servers: Chaos World for the Chaos series, Gate of Zero for the Steins sub-series, Robotics Club for the Robotics Notes games, and Occultic Code for Occultic 9 and Anonymous Code. Generally, you can find lots of fan explanations and theories within there. To summarize, the Science Adventure series is a long-running sci-fi multimedia franchise and mainly visual novel series in which there are 6 mainline entries, the most popular of which is Steins Gate. For all mainline entries besides Occultic 9, the source material is the visual novel. In addition to those mainline entries, there's also hundreds upon hundreds of hours' worth of side material, from which there are 4 side visual novels that people generally consider to be quite relevant. For all the translated visual novels in the series, the best way to play through them is generally on Steam and with their applicable improvement patches from the Committee of Zero SciADV fan group. And the best order to play through the series' games is in release order. But for non-visual novel side material, you can generally view them in whatever order interests you. By and large, the series' anime and manga adaptations tend to range from subpar to atrocious. But the anime adaptations do cut series connections to make their stories as standalone as possible. So if you are only interested in anime and not visual novels, then the only 2 sub-series I can recommend are Steins Gate and Occultic 9. And the recommended order to watch Steins Gate in is in release order: all of Steins Gate, followed by Steins Gate Episode 23 Beta, and finished off with all of Steins Gate 0. With that in mind, thank you all for watching! And I'd also like to give a huge thank you to everyone involved in the creation of this video. Just a few months ago, Darth, Cass, Orian, and I ran a panel at Anime North with the exact same title. Since it was quite positively received, I figured that we might as well turn that into a video essay, since I'm sure this is a topic people might be interested in. Compared to our panel, there are quite a few cuts, changes, and rearrangements that I made in order to keep this video at a reasonable length. For instance, I originally had sections for series inspiration and development history, as well as a completely different structure to the video, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how this went and would definitely appreciate any kind of constructive feedback. As new content in the series releases over the years, I will probably end up remaking this video, so there will be opportunity for me to directly apply that feedback and improve upon this. And of course, let me know if you have any questions about the series or anything in the video. But anyways, Nochio!